Hi guys, so just say a few things about a Warhammer. This is a Warhammer. It's not an original antique one, it is a replica one. Fairly easy to get hold of. Eastern European reenactment suppliers make pretty good affordable ones like this. So historically, what were Warhammers used for? Well, they were used both on horse and on foot. In actual fact, most of those that have surviving wooden handles, of which there are very few, the wooden handles are quite short, but I should say that most in museums actually with wooden handles, they're replacement wooden handles added to them in the 19th century because the wood had gone away, had disintegrated, or just because they wanted to put a nicer looking handle on it. And in fact there are some which have steel or iron handles, which are obviously more durable and have survived. They're quite short weapons, usually only about 20 inches long, 24 inches at max, that kind of thing. And obviously they're primarily for using in armour, against armour. You generally have a hammerhead on one side and a spike on the other side. Spike, particularly good obviously for trying to penetrate more mail rather than plate, because you'd be incredibly lucky to penetrate plate, although there is evidence that plate was penetrated by points like this. There's a few surviving helmets which have been found archaeologically with square and triangular holes through them, which may well have been from the back spike, either of one of these or maybe of a poleaxe or some kind of other pole weapon. Okay. So these are usually short, and these are often known as horsemen's hammers because they're short. In actual fact, they do appear in medieval and Renaissance art used by people on foot as well. Okay, why would you use the hammer face? Well, very simply, the spike tends to get stuck in things, whether you're hitting a fleshy body or mail, or potentially even penetrating plate, it can get stuck in things. So although the point is more likely to fatally injure your opponent in most circumstances, unless you hit the head, in which case either side will do, the point is more likely to get stuck in things. Should also mention the point can be used for hooking actions, very useful, and in fact a hammer like this is shown in the painting by Paolo Uccello from about 1430 something, of the Battle of San Romano. You can look that up on Google Images, and you actually see one of the horsemen using one of these Warhammers to deflect an incoming lance. He's on horseback, the other opponent's on horseback. Lance comes in towards him, he deflects the hammer up to the side in what we would call in Fiore a rabat, which means striking and beating upwards, beating off to the side from below, and it's described as a technique on horseback or on foot in Fiore, and he's rabatted up and he's very clearly about to bring the hammer down on someone's head. And so, you know, the hammer face is good because it doesn't get stuck on things. You can apply a lot of force into it, much like a mace, and it's not going to stop or get stuck in things, hopefully. Another thing to say about them, often these Warhammer heads, original ones, are stuck on a short staff because museum curators in the last 100-200 years thought that they should be on a short pole. However, there are some examples, and I believe the one in the Wallace collection might be an example, that there were probably pole axe, or more specifically pole hammer heads, and were probably originally on a longer pole weapon staff that came up to sort of chest height. Two more things I want to say about them. Firstly, the way that they're forged. The original ones that have been x-rayed, quite interesting because they tend to save the good quality steel, which was more valuable than lower grade steel or iron. And so what they often did was forge weld, much like a Japanese katana blade actually. They would forge weld the hard carbon steel parts on the point and the face of the hammer, and leave the body of the weapon of softer steel. So you'd have very hard striking surfaces where you needed them, and then you could use your average grade steel or iron for the rest of the body of the weapon. They usually or often have languettes, which are these, see the little tongue of steel or iron there coming down the side. In actual fact, many examples, and especially the pole weapon, the sort of poleaxe length ones, have longer languettes which come further down. And of course, you know, in a lot of books they'll say to stop the weapon's head being lopped off by a sword. Well, you know, try lopping that off with a sword, good luck. However, what they do prevent is heavy damage to the weapon from bladed weapons. and they just give it a longer lifespan. But also importantly, and this is something that most writers of books and museum curators don't consider so much, is that if you've ever used a Warhammer or any kind of pole weapon with a head on the end, if you're repeatedly hammering things with a lot of force, what you find sometimes is that the head can start to break away or come away from the shaft itself, and having these langets gives additional points of contact between the head and the shaft and makes it more durable. Okay, so there we go. Last thing I want to say about the Warhammer is that, unlike you will see in some fantasy films or role-playing games or whatever, Warhammer's heads, as Lindy Beige would say in regards to axes, are not huge. They cannot be. You think of a sledgehammer, okay? A sledgehammer head is, you all know what a sledgehammer head looks like. You can't use a sledgehammer as a very effective weapon because they're too heavy. Okay, now think of some of those fantasy Warhammers you see in fantasy art and stuff that are even bigger than a sledgehammer. You couldn't use that as a weapon unless you were ridiculously strong, and even then, no living person, world's strongest man, couldn't use a sledgehammer as an effective weapon. That's the sort of effective size for a Warhammer one-handed, and the two-handed, the poleaxe size one is a bit bigger than that, maybe up to 50% bigger, but no bigger than that. Thank you.